Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the SSB webinar series. My name is Steve Hank, and I'll be your host and moderating the session today's session of Trends in Modern Sports Sponsorships with AJ Maestas of Navigate Research. Prior to introducing AJ, just a couple of quick housekeeping items for everybody. When we go through the webinar today, at the bottom of your screen, you're going to notice there's the opportunity for you to enter questions, which you can submit to the group. We're going to try to get into as many of those questions and get as many of responses out to you as possible throughout the entire discussion. So please feel free to do that. And also during the webinar, we will be putting several polls that we're asking for your participation. We want to make this an interactive session, so they will pop up on your screen during the course of AJ's presentation to give us some context and some direction as to where we can take the presentation today. So now we'll get going, and we'll turn the portion prior to our Q&A session over to AJ Maestas, the CEO and founder of Navigate Research, which is really the industry's leader in terms of marketing and partnership research. AJ has worked with the biggest brands in the business, the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, and Visa, Toyota, Anheuser-Busch, ESPN on the partner side, and with franchises such as the Chicago Cubs, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Giants, and also Arizona State University. SSB is proud to call AJ a friend of ours, and also AJ happened to be a classmate of mine in the Arizona State Sports Business MBA program, so I also call him a personal friend. But would like to turn the presentation over to AJ today and tell us a little bit about what he's seeing as the trends in modern sports partnerships. So AJ, welcome, and thank you for agreeing to be here today.
Yeah, well, thank you for the kind introduction, Steve, and it's good to see you. And for new and old friends out there, not only were we in school together in our grad program, but Steve opened a lot of doors for Navigate. The first multimedia rights deal in the collegiate space we worked on was Arizona State's deal back in 2008. So I'm super grateful for what you've done for me in my career, and glad to have called you a client in the past and a partner and a friend. So thank you for having me here today. And it's nice to see and meet everybody, even though this is virtual and our, whatever we're going to call our new normal here. But it's very nice to meet you all. So we're talking about sponsorships. I'll give you a quick background on Navigate and a little bit of an agenda here. We'll save the topic that is a little bit overwhelming at this point and dominates the news for the end. So we'll talk about COVID insights and some other measures and trends we're seeing at the very end of this. We'll start with just a broad overview of sponsorship, but we're obviously talking about sponsorship going forward. So we're going to do our best to make this relevant to the future. And in the middle, we're going to sprinkle in a little bit about Gen Z and the next generation. If we're thinking about the future, we have to think about Gen Z. And the overwhelming subject matter and content is social, digital, mobile, as far as where we go with the future of activation, rights, value, etc. So that's the big picture. For those that don't know Navigate, Steve, thank you for the kind intro. We work with just about everyone you can name, all the league offices, all the major networks and broadcasters. Most of our history has been sponsorship related. About half of our business today is still related to the effectiveness or efficiency of sponsorships. But there's a lot of other stuff we do. We worked with NHL expansion the last few years, or the relocation of NFL teams, the television deal for the National Rugby League in Australia, all kinds of fun, interesting strategy assignments for league offices and teams. University of Central Florida, or UCF as we call it now, through a transitional phase, and the same over the last few years with the Milwaukee Bucks. That's been a really fun relationship. So this is me up here on the upper left. You can obviously see, and this face down here on the bottom right, we're the two most likely faces for you to see in your office anytime soon, as far as heading up, being a first point of customer service. I cover the West, and Phil here down on the bottom right covers the East. But everyone splashed on the screen is someone hopefully you know or will know, and that you're most likely to see leading an assignment for you. So that's the gist of Navigate and roughly who we are. We obviously live in the research, measurement, and insights world, and we're passionate about it. So we have a very aligned vision with SSB, and that being effectively, if you don't believe in 2020 that your strategy and business can be better using insights and strategy before tactics, then we're probably not a very good fit, right? So I'm thinking you're on this for a reason, and I'm thinking you're of that mindset already. But that's the filter for when we can be helpful. Is there a place for research and insights to improve decision making and strategy? So that's Navigate. Again, my name is AJ Maestas, and it's nice to meet you all. So I think there's going to be a poll to kick things off in that sort of spirit, asking essentially, does your organization make decisions based on gut or data or some mixture of both? And I think it's meaningful. I think it's an opportunity. If I'm sitting in your seat and I guess I'm not talking to a representative group of people, you are taking the time to educate and learn and get others' perspectives by even joining this webinar. I'm guessing you're of the mindset that you use insights to build your career and to build your business, and obviously we're of the same mindset, but still it's fun to ask because we know what the majority of people in sports do. We know the history, right? So sponsorships, big globally. I won't read these slides to you, but it's amazing how few people put real research and insights behind those decisions. Just some super high level insights we've learned over our 14 years of being in this business. This week is actually our 14th birthday, so we are adolescent. I think we all are concerned about where budgets are going. So a couple stats splashed up here. You get the gist of it. If I could add to this, the media projections that traditional measured media is going to go down by 40–45%, and that digital will go down somewhere between 20 and 30%. So in the sponsorship world, the estimates are that we're sitting in the middle there, but I think we all know we're about to take a haircut. I don't think this is necessarily true at the team level or property level, that you will actually see your sponsorship revenue decline by this, but this is budgets. A lot of the measured media components and activation and things like that are much easier to cut in the short term than a long-term contractual relationship, but those discussions are certainly coming. So, and we already have results from the poll. That's awesome. Mix of both was overwhelming majority. And of course, our awesome attendees today skew toward database decisions versus gut only. I think we know if we were to poll our whole industry and get honest answers on this, that we'd see it a little more balanced than this. But it is what it is. Hopefully today leaves you wanting for something a little more and helping your organization move a little further along that line. So we have this database. We think it's the only one in the world where we track people from all the way from awareness to purchase and refer, and all those key steps in the sales funnel along the way. And we're able to compare that to different types of sponsorships, geographies, different sports, different business categories. One of the metrics that comes out of this sort of methodology, of which we've employed hundreds and hundreds of times, thousands I assume at this point, is that very consistently people are 3 times as likely to buy and twice as likely to recommend a product or service that they know is a sponsor of their team, of a team they are a fan of. That is pretty incredible. That is about 10x the influence of a really good media campaign. So it's a big picture way of saying sponsorships work. But as an industry, this is usually not the story we're telling. We tend to tell a media equivalency story as opposed to an effectiveness story. And this is a drum I'm going to beat on a few times in our discussion today. But just as I mentioned, across different business categories, this tends to be a very consistent statistic. So the good news is sponsorships work if they're done right. The caveat here that's really important is aware fans. That's a pretty high hurdle to clear. And I think anyone joining this probably has an inkling or a knowledge that it tends to be that sponsorships are not appropriately activated. They are not. The intellectual property, the rights, the marks, the logos, they are not utilized to amplify that message enough, at least. Which takes me to our estimate on the point of diminishing returns on activation. So you'll see statistics out there that say people spend $2 in activation for every $1 in rights fees. I even worked at one of those companies that publishes one of those numbers. I really don't believe that. That's skewed, I think, by big global sponsors that do things like FIFA and Super Bowls and World Cups. The reality is in our estimation, it's about 20 cents on the dollar that the average brand activates. And even that is, the average is deceiving relative to the median. There are a healthy number of sponsors that do nothing. They treat it like media, set it and forget it. So what I'm imploring you to do and explore with this statistic we're sharing here is to say that the point of diminishing returns on average tends to be 50 cents on the dollar. That's 50 cents of activation for $1 in rights fee. But the problem with that is at point of diminishing returns, that's that inflection point, right, on a curve, doesn't mean negative ROI. It just means it's starting to switch from amplifying positive to negative, you know, or flattening of the curve, right? Given how we now discuss curves. So the idea is that on average, a brand should be spending at least 50 cents on the dollar. Every penny up to that threshold has an amplifying positive effect on that investment. So, or in other words, hearing my 20 or 21 cent metric on what we think the average sponsor does, the average sponsor could more than double their activation and still be getting an amplified positive effect on that return. The one big problem with the statistic is that it varies a great deal based on category. So unlike the 3x, 2x I shared with you on the previous slide, this one depends a great deal on a confectionery good that's a point of sale impulse purchase or very complex conversations like financial services. Now, feel free to follow up, of course. I know that Steve and the team from SSB will be sending out this recording as well as some other materials we mentioned here in follow-up, and we're happy to share further detail on further business categories if you have a very specific question. But the big takeaway from this slide is that almost everyone fails to activate relative to rights fees. This is an opportunity and also a threat, you know, in the COVID era. So pivoting to Gen Z consumption trends, if we're going to talk about the future, we got to talk about Gen Z. They are, depending on what definition you use, and I'll show you our definition here, they are turning 24 this year. They are adults. Some of them can drink beer. Many of them are in or out of college already. And they are quickly becoming that core 18 to 35-year-old sports fan that defines how our business is going to perform. And that's a bit of a problem. Just as millennials were radically different than prior generations and forced us to understand a different relationship with the customer, a different pathway to fandom, a different way to activate, so is Gen Z, again, relative to millennials. So it's a brave new world. If you are not feeling extremely up to speed with Gen Z, I would recommend doing some reading, investing in your future. So just for fun, just some real top line highlights. We're gonna talk a lot about social, digital, and mobile, but just so you know, these are the top 5 destination apps that Gen Z heads to. TikTok being number 1, by the way, first destination app. So, you know, not like texting or whatever is natural with the phone, but first place you go to in the morning. That's pretty incredible. And especially I think that's maybe 100 million active users right now. So incredibly small compared to some of these others. But these are the top 5. The text there is highlighting some of the research we've done on what people want from these platforms. You'd be amazed at how common it is at the team level to sort of just blast across all platforms the same message versus using them for, you know, essentially what your customer wants to see on those given platforms. But it's a different world because I didn't know what TikTok was a year ago. And here it is, number 1 destination app for Gen Z. This one's fun. I'm going to ask for you to think about this one for a second. This chart we're seeing right here is showing you millennials in the grayed out bar and Gen Z in the dark bar. And this is sort of like in that sports competition genre, what they're most interested in. Just for fun, can you guess on down this list? Number 1 is usually pretty easy. If you look at millennials, look at that massive drop here between millennials and Gen Z for the NFL, but still number 1. And granted, these are some pretty young people, so there's definitely time for their preferences to change. But what do you think number 2 is? This is the one that I think is most fun. It's not the NBA, as you can now see. NBA is doing excellent with young people. There's no question about that on an index or otherwise basis, but this was surprising to us. And here comes some of the other sports with collegiate athletics being surprising as well, since more than half of Gen Z hasn't entered college yet. Usually that's the breakthrough moment for collegiate sports for a fan and a big part of that, you know, pathway to fandom. But this is a little bit cheating, but number 2 on this is Fortnite. As you can see in the upper right here, we're defining this as sort of passionate interest in the sports realm, but pretty interesting and kind of amazing. A radical shift if you were to stack up those millennial bars and compare the difference. So that is our reality with Gen Z. I don't think I'll ever be the expert that I wish I could be, but there's much, much more. We just released a study on Gen Z. Happy to share some highlights from that from anybody who wants to follow up. And we publish a lot of these findings on our LinkedIn page. So if you get linked in with Navigate Research or myself. We will publish little nuggets from this stuff that we think are really helpful in the sales and renewal process or time of year, whatever a hot topic would be for, you know, that subject matter. So let me give you a break here with another poll. I think we're going to ask something related to your organization and if it is a mobile first organization. You can probably guess that I'm about to show you a world that we believe is and should remain mobile first. So we could have given you 20 different versions of this slide, but if you'll just ignore the slide for a second and just take my word for it, sometime between 2013 and 2018, virtually everything became mobile first, whether that's unique eyeballs, total advertising dollars, total minutes spent. So ignoring the chart and taking my word for it for a moment, it is a mobile first world, hence the question, hence the poll question, right? And you would be amazed at how many organizations are not mobile first. In fact, it's not even catching up to traditional measured mediums. And this is a challenge in the sponsorship world, not just with activation, but even with rights. How do you generate the revenue associated with that and who's getting that revenue? Spoiler alert, it's Facebook and Google. It's estimated the last 3 or 4 years, it's hard to be perfect on this, but it's somewhere in the mid 90 percentile of revenue growth in digital has gone to those two companies, Facebook and Google. That's including all their family of brands and you know, content, of course. Well, you can see the poll results, and it's not surprising, but keep in mind, this is not a representative group of people. These are people here to learn, people here to grow their career, grow their organization. I'm guessing, again, if we had an unbiased poll of everybody in sports, it would look even worse as far as being mobile first. So that puts our industry roughly somewhere between 7 and 1 year behind the reality. And the growth rate of mobile, which you can see, you know, displayed on this chart, means that it's not an investment that you're going to want to take off the gas pedal anytime soon, right? This is the now or the recent yesterday, and it is unquestionably the future. If you just highlight on these areas in red, you look at 2010 versus 2 years ago, and what you're looking at with the orange bar is time spent, and what you're looking at with the blue bar is ad spend. And what on the left you're seeing is basically advertising dollars taking a long time to catch up to the reality of where consumers spend their time. And you're seeing in 2018, for the first time on the right, ad dollars kind of matched up with where people spent their time. And if you can squint and see in the grayed out area on the far left of each chart, you see print. And you can see, you know, what we all know as the decline of print and their, you know, their fiscal challenges, their business challenges. But the point is that 2 years ago, the measured media world caught up to this. People in that, you know, media planning and measurement world, you know, have matched up, even though it took them a while. Of course, you know, there was a line between these two dates where people got there. The problem is we're not there in sports, and I think we all know that. I can't perfectly quantify it, so I didn't want to show you a chart. But if you look at a pie chart or the ratio of assets, rights, and benefits in a given sponsorship, and how much of those are represented through mobile or digital, we are massively lagging where brands want their dollars to go, how they want to reach audiences, and those categories are growing faster than everywhere else. So scary. It's similarly displayed on this chart, and I promise we're going to get away from these nerdy charts soon. But if you look, what we're looking at on the x-axis here is CPM, or cost per thousand, the historical, traditional efficacy measure for media, and as far as reaching a certain audience. And on the y-axis up here, we see purchase intent. This is coming from that database we have where I told you we can measure movement through the sales funnel and the effectiveness of sponsorships. What you're essentially seeing is that the market looks somewhat efficient, right? As much as we know it's an incredible premium, we're showing sports sponsorship assets, they're almost $50 a CPM on average. There's a reason, and the reason is that it's effective. It's highly influential. Same reason we all work in this industry. The same thing that gets a lot of sponsorship buyers excited just to be able to, you know, attend games and sit in a great seat is the same thing that makes Joe consumer more likely to switch to that product or service. We always pay attention when we see something lying off of an efficient curve like this. If you look there on the upper left, that's social media. This data is a little bit old, but the point is incredibly cost efficient while being highly effective on influence. A lot of that has to do with the third-party referential power of you know, the mob, essentially saying, this is cool, this is interesting, this is a hot topic, this is something you should do. But we all know there's plenty of influencers in there that are paid. And I think we probably all recognize that the younger generations have a strange disconnect between what they see as advertising and influence and someone they think they have a relationship with that is authentic in the form of a sponsorship. What that's essentially indicating is that the whole world's moving more towards our world of sponsorship, but we, in my opinion, are stuck in this old school model of trying to prove media equivalency. This is why we deliver all these really puffy, unrealistic numbers to say that you've got an equivalent number of impressions. This argument breaks my heart because if you look over here on the y-axis, you can see that the real story is if you want to sell more widgets, sports and entertainment, these points of passion that people connect to is super effective, but it is not efficient on a per touch basis. So we sort of fight fire with fire versus the measured media world by lying with these puffy numbers, when in reality, we could be showing the effectiveness of these measures. There is a portal that SSB has as an example, and I'm sharing this because it doesn't always have to be an expensive solution. There's they essentially have technology that would allow you to sort of measure outcomes and metrics with business partners so that you can measure actual outcomes as opposed to impressions. And what's beautiful about this is you can have this discussion, whether you're in sales or service or you're on the brand side, to understand with your partner what you're trying to achieve, put some quantifiable measure around that and write it into the contract, stick it into that SSB portal and revisit it every year. And it holds everybody accountable and clearly communicates what you're trying to achieve. That is a true effectiveness measure. So it doesn't have to be perfect and true ROI. We don't have to follow people to the register, which is essentially impossible as of right now, to exactly know that we were the trigger that made them purchase something. There's other ways to measure outcomes and effectiveness, but it's somehow grossly underrepresented in our sponsorship world. So this is the gist. We wish our industry would move to effectiveness and away from efficiency. If you think about the big picture of where sports was going even before COVID, ratings were generally on a decline globally. Fragmentation of media and distraction and essentially competition with these devices it was a losing game, at least for now. And it sure looks like it's going to stay that way for sports. Attendance was on a global and consistent decline. Of course, we all know new stadium, different scenarios for your specific organization. But as a macro trend, is the tide coming in or going out? This is the reality. And so the measures on efficiency using eyeballs, other than some of the sports like the NBA that can show this growing global audience, is essentially a losing story. I'll stop, I'll get off my soapbox, but I sure wish we as an industry could move to more intelligent measures of effectiveness and outcomes as opposed to media equivalency, especially given where media is going. Skip this slide, pretend you didn't see that, but that's just showing the influence of those players that are making the money. So I'm going to pause for a second just as a reminder that there is a Q&A. You're welcome to ask questions. We are going to save those for the end, but the team is sort of curating those and going to pick some highlights. So I apologize for saving those until the end. But if you have a question, I bet other people do too, please ask that. All right, so COVID, our favorite subject, I think. I wish it wasn't true, but it is what it is. So here we are. So you heard me talk about 3X, 2X as far as likely to purchase and likely to recommend. So effectiveness is there on sponsorships. And I'm bringing this up because the reality is we know budgets are going to get cut. We know people are going to scrutinize. Folks on the brand side are worried about their jobs. Many of them are in reactive mode. We're really proud to work with some of the brands that are proactive, but the majority are waiting to find out when your season is officially announced and what the format is going to be to understand what was lost. So there's time for you to still be in front of this. Not much time, we're talking a week or two, but there is still time to be in front of the curve here on make goods and what's next. So some highlights, we're predicting ratings over the sustained season, whatever it looks like, will be up 25 to 50% over normal. Shockingly, that's only taking us back to ratings of 10 or 15 years ago in the past. That's how tough things have been on sports ratings the last 10, 15 years. But that's our estimate. We could be wrong. Who can really perfectly predict the future? But the beauty is that means your television audience will grow. The bad news is it will not grow enough to cancel out what is lost from on-site activation and rights and impressions. So as you can see in the bottom left here, 40 to 50% of sponsorship value, depending on the sport and a number of other factors, comes from in-person exposure at the venue. So that's a problem because we're assuming 50 to 90% of that's going to go away, right? In some situations, 100% of that's going away. And the real problem with that is if you look at our final little square here in the bottom right, the cost per touch for those in-person assets is 5 to 10 times that more than television, social, digital, and mobile. So you would have to get 5 to 10 times the amount of television exposure for the same type of impression to essentially make up that value. So that's not going to happen. In short, there's not going to be enough inventory to go around to make up for what is lost by fans not being in the stadium. No butts in seats, not enough to make up for it. So of course we know of all the measures the leagues are taking that you're all probably engaged with at some level to find new television visible inventory and to sort of mitigate those losses. But for savvy brands that know what they're doing, that understand value, it won't be enough. So I won't go through the range of tactics to mitigate that, whether it's punting to future years and what have you. But the point is that there is a gap right now. Not every brand will be savvy enough to recognize that gap, but there also won't be enough inventory to go around for those who do recognize it. So what can you possibly do? We've got some recommendations here for action to take on the right. I won't read those to you, but you get the gist if you just skim read right now. And the high level feedback, in my opinion, is to be honestly assessing how important this is to their business and what it does for their business. Every brand out there is having to pivot their messaging and their business model, and there's something they're going to run toward. If they're purely running away from things, they're probably going to go out of business. So if you can have, which I'm sure you all are, an honest conversation with your partners about what their post-COVID plan is, we see incredible opportunities beyond just the tactical value exchange of make goods for where eyeballs will be versus where they're not. But there's other things you can do. Think about all the missed weddings and anniversaries and birthdays. Think of all the celebrations that have been sort of lost to the 90 days of this COVID experience so far. There's a chance to celebrate. There's a chance to celebrate a coming back of a community. We don't have to speak to Black Lives Matter or all of the other challenges that communities are feeling with high levels of unemployment and the divide between haves and have-nots. There's a way in which you can bring people together through sports. In my personal experience, the only thing that really brings a community together that is positive is sports, right? Where you see people of all different backgrounds and socioeconomic places coming together to high five and cheer and celebrate their city and their community, even if it's a virtual community. The other things that bring the world together tend to be negative, war or what have you. So I think there's an incredible opportunity for celebration and community coming out of this. I won't coach you, and I'm not a creative, but these things do tie into effectiveness. Sponsorships are different than media, and they have a different impact than media. Sponsorships appeal to your feelings and your association with the community and the goodness inside of us, right? There's a beauty to sponsorships that goes beyond just an ad. Everybody knows they're being pitched when you see a 30-second commercial, but when you see a really authentic sponsorship, one with authentic integration, where you see that product or service being showcased in authentic use, the impact is many multiples, as we discussed earlier, that 3x, 2x being about 10x of a good media campaign. So that's the story. That's the story that we need to be telling. Understanding your brands, what they're really trying to achieve, and trying to appeal to their better sense of the effectiveness of what they're doing with marketing as opposed to just eyeballs and impressions. And in a perfect world, this is a long-term pivot. This is the new normal. This is who we become as an industry. We stop selling based on eyeballs, and we start selling based on the power and effectiveness of what sports offers. So a couple nuggets that I'm hoping are helpful for you. You heard me talk about 50 cents on the dollar as far as activation and rights fees. Please know you can follow up with questions on other business categories, even if I can't answer them on the spot here. But some highlights I think your sales team will enjoy if you're not on the sales team. 250% is the increase in sales on brands that maintained or increased their ad spending during the last recession versus those that cut back. Now, it's a little unfair. This isn't test versus control, because maybe you're in a good business segment to increase advertising during a downturn. But it's an argument for increasing your spend in advertising. And, to prove that we eat our veggies and that we practice what we preach, Navigate is advertising and sponsoring more than we ever have before in our history, trying to reach and connect with people in this virtual world. Increase in market share of 2.5 times for those that were aggressive ad spenders versus others, again, in the last recession. So it might seem counterintuitive to advertise at a time when sales are down and disposable income is down, but part of this is the share of voice with everyone cutting back. And I think we all know this in our heart, but it's really hard to actually execute, right? Fortune favors the brave is what this is essentially saying. And if you can't immediately turn it into revenue, that's not always a bad thing. We have a client, one of our best clients that we work with on the brand side is Anheuser-Busch. As you know, within 2 weeks of the pandemic sort of hitting us all and sports coming to a stop, they had pivoted toward community building, philanthropic efforts, and they had shifted their messaging, and they had moved toward a place of, we'll worry about sales later, but here is what we stand for and who we are. And keep in mind, marketing decisions are almost entirely gut instinct, feeling based. Sports marketing ones are essentially entirely feeling based. And I'm talking about season ticket holders, what you're a fan of, but obviously how you react to sponsors is what we're really discussing here today. We will justify it with logic and facts and sort of rationale, but it's very feeling based. So advertising in a time now where, in Anheuser-Busch's example, they can sell nothing on premise, which is about 30% of their revenue. So their business was crippled, just as it was for so many. But they knew that appealing to the better spirit of people would have a lasting impact on why they have a 50% share in beer in what is essentially a commoditized product, right? Pretty incredible. The same story is true for Coca-Cola, right? And why does Coca-Cola have such a large market share versus very similar tasting alternative beverages? I think there's a video that conveys this. If you all haven't seen the Anheuser-Busch campaign, I'm going to try to play this for you real quick here. And I might need a little help from our friends at SSB. Forgive us for a moment of working through technical details, but I think you'll enjoy the video if you haven't seen it, so it's worth the wait. And maybe we won't get it. Oh, there we go. What a shame. It looks like we're going to fail here, but that happens. No big deal. We'll send that in a follow-up link. If you haven't seen it, I think you'll really enjoy it. It's touching, it's meaningful. And when you're having conversations with brands, I think it's when you could forward them and say, look what these people did in March. Well, most people are still sitting around trying to figure out what they're going to do from a brand's perspective. And keep in mind, it's fair. These people are worried about their jobs, right? Here was Anheuser-Busch, off on a campaign. It allowed them to pivot and already get back to things like humor and some connectivity with their actual product by the time the NFL draft came along, about a month after that. And it again allowed them to move forward into what they're doing today, which not all of this is positive, right? There's challenges. Their business has been harmed. They need help in getting through this. But I just love it from a community building perspective. Another client of ours, Visa, and this will be another commercial we'll send you all in follow-up, did a really good thing with utilizing their athletes. They made the commitment, as you can imagine, to stand by all their Olympic athletes despite the 1-year delay on Tokyo 2020. But just essential public service announcements, efficiently and effectively washing your hands and, safe social distancing. And the talent was happy to do so, right? They were thrilled to maintain their endorsements and happy to, help the world move forward. People remember these things. There's no question. Brand association and the power of a brand is essentially what we all do for a living, right? When we talk about sponsorship marketing. So what an opportunity to pivot, not an opportunity, I think, to retreat. Don't get me wrong. There's moments where we have to cut. That's our reality. So I won't read this list with you. We've kind of addressed this, but if there's one thing I could leave you with on a COVID activation plan, it would be what an opportunity for an honest assessment of what stuff's worth. If you think about the business SSB is in, or that Navigate is in, or that probably many of you are in to even bother listening to this webinar, this is your sort of chance to differentiate yourself at work. This is a chance to bring a level of intelligence, some certainty, some confidence to the decision-making of your partners and your coworkers that they might not currently have in this time of incredible uncertainty. Even if it's not a full picture, right? I think we're okay in times like this in a triage emergency moment on making decisions with, just directional information. So what an opportunity, what a value that you all provide. Hello, Steve, it's good to see you join our video. Just got a couple more slides, and you should feel free to interrupt me, but we've published some stuff on COVID in reaction to COVID. Guy on our team, Jordan Bloom, really interesting guy, grew up mostly in Singapore and in Tokyo. Between undergrad and his MBA in sports business, he worked for the Sports Commission in Shanghai. So he's lived through SARS in '03 and different perspective on how Asia reacted to COVID. So we've been doing a lot of work with proxy assessment of what's going on in other countries and how they've handled COVID and the return to play. So I think there's a lot that Jordan Bloom and other members of our team, like Kelly Williams, who conducted the study you're looking at right now, could do to help you with your fan sentiment, what to expect with comfort and attendance, reaction and methods in which people are getting people back in the stands. So again, we'll follow up with a couple teasers on this research. That's free for everybody. But for a couple highlights, I would concentrate just on the bottom right here. We're asking people what they predict their behavior will be, which I'm sure many of you understand some of the flaws in respondent-based feedback. But one little trick for those that do your own in-house research, as opposed to asking people what they will do, if you ask people what the masses will do, it's a far more accurate prediction. For whatever reason, we believe we're not influenced by marketing. We believe we attend games more often than we say. Like for fun, if you think about back in the day when everyone had Scarborough, you look at that watch, attend, listen, or just look at the attend, and the number of people who say they attend as estimated by the research always exceeds like capacity of the stadium, or certainly at least actual attendance. So this is a method basically to make people a little more accurate in predicting the future as far as behavior. Again, people predict the masses better than they predict their own behavior. And that's some of the methodology we used here. So what you're seeing is people's predictions on, obviously, as you can imagine, increased viewership, streaming, digital, which we can see actual empirical evidence that we can match this up against for you as well. And then attendance, you can just see sentiment on attendance. Digging a little deeper, you could ignore all the numbers and just kind of look at the colors here in this very bottom row. What you're essentially seeing is, although everyone expects to attend less, the sports that people are feeling more or less favorable about attending. And a lot of this reflects who the fan base is, but some of it's counterintuitive to what you might think. And this last slide here, I apologize for being so technical, but what you're looking at is people's interest and willingness to attending before a vaccine. Pretty incredible. Everything kind of hovers around 80%. I think that's really promising. That's a lot of people who at least say that they're willing to attend again before a vaccine is widely distributed. And then you can see the time lag they're putting on this, which is a little more sobering than the percent who claim it. But we're expecting the reality to be a little better than that. But our honest responsibility around, the safety of the virus and its spreading will restrict beyond what people's willingness is. But that's good news. That's good news for us, right? It means people are probably going to be more willing to attend, and we're going to be able to allow them to attend safely. So a lot of information. I apologize for going so fast. You see my info there. It's kind of disturbing. It's my cell phone, but feel free to call or text. My email is probably best because it allows me to play point guard with our team and distribute those questions. And as I mentioned, Steve Hank and the SSB team will be following up with some of these materials. And I know we have some Q&A right now for those of you that submitted questions. But don't be shy. We mean to be helpful. Our intent is to help our industry through this. We want to be one of the people that is said to have helped rise the tide during these challenging times. We do what we do for a love. We would make a lot more money and our life would be a lot easier if we did what we do in any other industry than sports, much like yourself. So we're in it to win it with you all, and we're committed to being a helpful partner in our industry. So please don't be shy in calling on myself or anybody on the Navigate team. If you saw something in today's presentation that sparked a need, odds are that we have several studies that back up that one statistic or comment that can help you in your situation, and we do our best to help for free as a friend with something that's just sitting on the shelf, right? So thank you, and Steve, feel free to pepper me here with these questions that have been coming in.
Great, we have several that have come in, AJ. One of the first ones that was asked was, we know that there's structural differences between how professional sports organizations operate and how collegiate sports operate. Can you talk about how those differences are impacting the sponsors, the organizations, the institutions now that the marketplace has shifted a little bit?
Yeah, I'm so glad there's some collegiate people out there. That makes me very happy. My passion is collegiate athletics. It's my favorite thing to work on. We're actually working on some multimedia rights deals right now for universities. For those that aren't super familiar with the collegiate landscape, about 95% of major universities outsource their sponsorship sales to a third party like IMG, Learfield, JMI, some of those players, which creates a very different environment. Again, just for a little background for those that aren't following it closely, as do most contracts, these arrangements have this force majeure language that says if there's some extraordinary event like a global pandemic that causes the kind of reduction that we've projected in sponsorship dollars, that they come to a meeting of the minds in a reasonable place for relief in that situation. So it's a really tough situation, because one of the main reasons that universities outsource those rights, as do most international clubs, by the way, the majority of international football, rugby clubs, whatever the sport might be, also have an outsourced arrangement. Not always a guarantee, though, the way the college model works. So one of the top reasons to outsource is to get that certainty of revenue, to have that guarantee, to create that confidence when you're working for a public state entity in a university where there's so many stakeholders you have to serve, compared to a pro sports team that essentially has to worry about revenue and winning. So it's tough. It's really tough, because what was invested in and believed to be a certainty shows that even that, has some flexibility. Certainly we can't have Learfield go bankrupt because of COVID and the overwhelming dominant share of that market just disappear. This did happen in the past, by the way. In 2001, there was a business that had FIFA's business and a number of other, sort of committed relationships. I even think of an Olympic relationship that went bankrupt. So it's a real threat and risk to a service provider, right, that handles so much of this. It's really difficult in collegiate, because their deals tend to be shorter term. They tend to be very radio heavy. They have even a lower percent of digital assets and some of the new assets that the world wants that are very measurable, by the way. I mean, you keep in mind, we're competing with an investment in Facebook or Google, where they can know exactly who's watching it and perfectly laser focus and target that investment and measure it in real time. So it's tough, because if pro sports is lagging, as I claim in this presentation, the rest of the measured media world, collegiate athletics is even further behind. So it's pretty scary. The universities are being asked to go into a rev share model, in which they share that risk reward with their business partners in a lot of, if not most, scenarios. The reality is their revenue is gonna probably go down, and it's gonna be tough. It's gonna be a tough climb back up. So if you want them to stay in business, you got to meet them in the middle, or do it yourself and bring those rights in house. But it's a really difficult situation. We're monitoring it daily. We're working on it daily with a number of universities. I would recommend calling on the best thought leaders in that space, from pro and collegiate, and exploring what your options are. Because if you do move away from a guaranteed model and you don't have that revenue certainty, then now what is the benefit of outsourcing? And there's no doubt in my mind that the Learfields of the world perform better than schools when they had it in-house. But is this a moment and a time to pivot? Could you bring it in-house? Or is there a different model we're not considering? There are other factors other than revenue certainty, right? The hiring and firing of talent and compensating in variable ways that are difficult for universities to do. But long answer to a simple question, but I gotta say, what an opportunity. If you're looking for opportunities in exciting new worlds, I believe there'll be new players that emerge, new business models that come from it. And there's opportunities for universities to do things in new and different ways, even if maybe they're not financially better. So yeah, I would call on your inner network of thought leaders in this space and ask some serious questions before you just march forward blindly. Pretty exciting. I see opportunity, even though we're probably all going to take a little haircut here in the short term.
And one additional follow-up that came in the collegiate athletics, and then we'll move over to the professional sports ranks. When looking at the TV rights landscape in the Power Five that's out there, outside of the Power Five conferences, what can some of the larger non-Power Five leagues do to grow their value to their media partners?
Well, one of the positives is that, they have more control on inventory. They have more control on their rights. The Power Five tend to lock up most of those rights to their multimedia rights partner or to their tier 1, 2, 3 network deals. This is true for pro sports too, right? What are you doing to grow the size of the pie so your slice of it can be larger? So if you want your media rights or sponsorships to be larger, what are you doing to have a larger audience or represent more assets? Something I haven't seen done, except for the Pac-12 considered it, I think, in collegiate athletics, is to invest in other rights and content. There isn't a single, maybe there's one, but there's virtually no pro sports team owners that regret taking equity in and investing in their media and assets, like the creation of a regional sports network and then broadcasting other sports rights. Now, I know there's some NCAA rules that make this difficult, but why wouldn't you create a network or create a platform for your athletes that might even scale to high school athletics? If you think of coaches and the camps that they put on in summer, which affects recruiting, but also the relationship with the university and the brand and future student athletes. Why not just be, if you're already in the business, right, of sports media, why not ask yourself what other complementary assets are out there? The MLS did, I think, a really savvy thing in creating Soccer United Marketing, which is a promoter and owner and investor in rights and redistributive rights of things like, international tournaments and media rights. I think that was really smart, really smart. Why wouldn't you vertically and horizontally invest in what you're already an expert in? So if I was at a group of 5 university and trying to figure out how I can keep up with the big boys, because their trajectory is definitely more positive and different, I would ask myself how I broaden the scope of what we do and our geographic footprint and our rights, benefits, and assets.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question that came across is, how do you feel the centralization of digital assets within the major North American leagues, i.e. MLB, what MLB Advanced Media has done, what MLBAM has done, impacts the ability of the individual teams to market and sell those assets? And how can the teams position themselves better given those restrictions?
We'll have to do this in follow-up because we have some ideas, but we don't have the billion-dollar answer yet on how to keep that digital money for yourself as opposed to having it run away to Google and Facebook. But we have some ideas. We're doing some really cool work with Tigres, Liga MX club in Monterrey, Mexico right now, that I think is super relevant. So let me get our expert on that to share that in follow-up. But I love the question because as incredible as BAM has been, right, for baseball and the multi-billion-dollar sale, and it's such a smart thing in so many ways that it's one of the most progressive things that baseball has done in the last 20 years. It kills me at a local level. It drives me nuts, when I think of the brands that we work with and how incredibly important those assets are for those brands and the ability to activate and control that. If you look at the wild success globally that has been achieved that we are not doing domestically, I'd roughly put it in 2 categories. One of it is sort of a community feel, like creating a virtual community. There's these membership clubs where people in Beijing claim to be a passionate fan of Manchester United and never in their life will they go to a game. I think they may not have even seen a live game. A lot of times it's just a fashion, cool association, Western world thing. But number one is essentially this virtual community, right? And that is so critical to the future of sponsorships and growing fans. And it drives me nuts how that those rights are not in baseball teams' control. And then the second one, which is very related to that, is basically global appeal. Most of the growth potential is global for most sports. And you see these using the EPL or, FC Barcelona and Real Madrid are great examples, right? I mean, Real Madrid is a number 1, 2, or 3 club by any metric globally, and their league wouldn't indicate they'd be in that place. It's because they have the rights and ability to promote themselves all over the world, do friendlies all over the world, to grow their fan base all over the world, and do sponsorships all over the world. Many times these gaudy statistics you see of their fan base is actually like they'll do a telco deal with a giant telco in China that might have like 600 million customers, and instantly they get their data and they get to cross-promote content. So for those 2 things are rare and far too rare for US clubs, and a lot of it's the league controls and rules. It breaks my heart. If I can help you make an argument with the league, we got hired this fall to do a lot of the strategy work, like a commissioner's office level work for baseball. Immediately discovered some things that are new and exciting that were different than past strategy. The implementation of these has obviously been halted given COVID, but using baseball as a specific example, there are some of these messages we're sharing, discussions we're having with amazing people at the league office. Whoever asked that question, I would love to follow up and talk about it, because for baseball to succeed, and it has plenty of challenges right now, you want and need those digital rights and those global rights. I know that's not helpful, but at least it's an affirmation to your question.
So we'll have time for 3 more questions here, AJ. One is, the inclusion of data in sports sponsorships programs has really started to evolve over the last few years. Where do you see the future of data use in relation to the sponsorship and partnership marketplace?
Well, I'm repeating myself a little bit, so I'll try to say succinct. The money is flowing to Google and Facebook in super measurable places. And these are double-digit % growth per year type dollars. These people are printing money. That one slide I flashed by was showing the cash on the balance sheet for Google and Facebook. You know, they could buy every pro sports team in the United States right now in cash if they were hypothetically all for sale. I mean, if you think they're scared of us, they can be in sports and do what they want anytime they want to. But so far, they don't think they need to, because user-generated content and just the social media environment generates enough impressions and growth for them and enough associated ad revenue that they're killing it without paying for rights. And of course, they pay, you know, for some of these rights deal agreements, but it's a pittance, you know, relative to their business models. So sounds so self-serving, so forgive me for being biased because of what Navigate does, but we need to measure outcomes and performance. We can't even get in the room in the next decade if you can't prove effectiveness on some of these dollars. For every incremental dollar, if you're a giant brand, you know exactly what it does for you if you give it to a digital player, and it's on a hope and a prayer and some cheesy earned media report if you give it to a sports team. So we're still getting dollars, right? Because people are passionate about sports and they know that's a place of community. You know, that's the one place that's bringing people together for appointment-based viewing. We know that it brings the largest audiences together on television. So we have plenty of strong ground to stand on as an industry, but what role does it play? I think it plays the primary role. The rest of the world is going to, like that opening question was, you know, does your organization use data and insights to make decisions? We are not far off from the entire world making all decisions with marketing using that. And creatives will never go away. There is still those heartstrings that we need to appeal to in only a human and elemental way. But when they do, that campaign will be measured. And if it didn't succeed in touching those heartstrings, that campaign will be stopped, and quickly. There won't be 20-year investments hoping they work out. So I can't emphasize it enough. And it's affordable and it's not that hard. And what an opportunity for you, for whoever asked that question, or those who are listening. What a way for us to differentiate ourselves versus our competition, whether that be coworkers or other teams or other brands. It's a win-win for your career and for your business, in my opinion.
Right. Two more with this. This is a tactical question that came from somebody and said the major pushback that they're getting out in the industry is not now. We're waiting to see what happens. We're waiting to see what happens and our budgets are done for this year. When is the appropriate time for people to start engaging and pushing for those partners and trying to get them to make that final commitment?
You know, a great salesperson said to me one time, there's never a bad time to ask. You know, some people don't call Monday morning or Friday late in the day or something like that. They're saying not now, but somebody's moving up their priority list and someone's moving down their priority list. The exercise that we try to do at Navigate is we ask ourselves, you know, what is in their best interest? You know, what is motivating them? What are their public and private fears? You know, what does that individual decision maker really want? What is going on with that business? COVID's scary. You know, they're probably worried about their jobs. They're worried about where the budget's going to go. They're worried about all the people they're going to have to disappoint when they ask for COVID relief or make goods. So there's some real stresses, and there's ways you can be a relief on that. You know, time shifting, which I'm not sharing anything anybody probably hasn't thought of on this call, but it's a lot easier to commit to future years. It's why your alma mater asks for a multi-year pledge that grows over time, because it's easy to promise now, and people hold to those promises at a pretty high rate, like 90+%. So, you know, I would time shift them and budget in mind. I'd shift to what their specific priority was. I would, you know, extend deals. I would appeal to their public and private fears, and I wouldn't accept that not now is an acceptable answer. Even if they are being honest, they don't know because they're waiting for direction from above. Maybe you're not talking to the right decision maker, but even if they don't really know and now is not the right time, you can still influence and shape when is the right time. If you have their best interest in mind, right? If you can literally put yourself, not literally, if you can figuratively put yourself in their shoes and think about what is in the best interest of business XYZ, you have a solution, I believe, even if it's a step backwards before you take 2 steps forward.
And the last question would be, what are the most significant changes you see coming? You know, take out your crystal ball for a minute here, and what are the most significant changes, and how many of them are going to be short-term in nature, and are any going to trigger a shift to a new normal for the marketplace? And perhaps an example from what I've seen out there is, you know, a lot of institutions in the collegiate space and a lot of pro sports teams were somewhat hesitant to potentially move all into digital ticketing. Obviously now with COVID, the desire and the digital ticketing move will probably never go back to paper tickets at the way that it used to be. Do you see any other aspects such as that in your crystal ball?
I think this, for the most part, accelerated things that were going to happen anyway. You know, do you really want to carry 5 bobbleheads in your family of 5, you know, back to the car? Or would you just love to QR code scan and it's being drop shipped to your house? And you get to celebrate twice. Once, whoa, we got the cool bobblehead. We got it, green light, you know, I received it. I didn't have to touch anybody, by the way. And there was no like physical movement in the stadium or logistics with it. And then a week later, it shows up in my house and we get to celebrate again. The digital ticking example, there's no question there's going to be collectors that want the print copy, but no problem, right? You know, beautiful, pristine copy, lanyard, or whatever it is I want sent to my house of my ticket as a souvenir, but I'm digitally tracked all over the arena. People always express this sort of resistance to change, and then they get over it incredibly quickly. If you just look at the last 50 years and the way people lived 50 years ago versus the way they do today, and that explosive rate of change for technology, we are very adaptive beings. We were ready for these things. It was just, you know, the speed at which we're willing to implement them. And this is sort of an excuse, you know, to make that shift to comfort. So everything virtual accelerated, everything social, digital, mobile accelerated, everything shipped to me accelerated, right? And these aren't necessarily bad things. There's real wins in here. There's wins for health. There's wins on cost. There's wins on service level and touch points, and there's wins on data. Since this is the last question, and it's so core to what you and I do for a living, Steve, how measurable is it to have their home address and know exactly where you're shipping it to? You would be amazed at how many, and I'm sure you see this every day, how many team databases you get into where the ticket buyer versus the person sitting in the seat is dramatically apart, 40, 30, 40%. You know, you think this is your ticket buyer database and therefore they're in the seats, and any given night they're not. The Saints did this really cool thing, like, this is really old, like 8, 9 years ago. They literally went up and down with the interns, passing 3.5 or by 5 cards, having people, you know, enter to win, I think, a free season ticket. It was a pretty meaningful incentive, and then cross-referenced versus what they had in their database. And, you know, again, 40% of the people are different. So do you really know who's sitting in your building and you don't have that data in 2020, when Google and Facebook knows everything we're doing, including what we're doing right now, and you don't know who's inside your building? It's crazy. So yeah, there's permanent changes coming, but they're benefits, they're wins. I really don't see these as long-term negatives. Of course, we're going to feel pain in the next 2 years, but I think this is a positive leap forward for sports long-term.
Great. AJ, can't thank you enough for taking the time to share your expertise and your thoughts on the marketplace. Thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it. For everybody, just a couple things. You can view the replay of this webinar if you want to look back at it. As AJ indicated earlier, we will be sending out a follow-up email that has content, the presentation, and other elements from this webinar out to all of the attendees. But you can view the replay of this one and all of our future and past webinars on the SSB website at ssbinfo.com. Please take a few minutes at the end, if you would, to help us out by answering the survey questions that will pop up on your screen when you leave. It helps us know how we did and what we can do moving forward. So hope everybody stays healthy and safe. And again, AJ, thanks again. Appreciate your time.
All right, see you all soon, I hope. It'll be a good sign for all together in person soon. So goodbye. Have a great week, everybody.
Take care.